You've got a powerful sentence in the book about we in the West like to feel good about ourselves all the time.
Yeah.
One of a number of places where you really put the boot in, if you don't mind me putting it like that.
Yeah. You know, as God has shrunk from the horizon, some of the kind of sentiment in Christianity has become transformed into sentimentality. And this then colludes with this stress on, feeling good about yourself. This kind of self-esteem movement, which is not congenial to Dharma, of course. and so compassion then, this rather decayed idea of compassion, then, as I say, is in this horrible marriage with self-esteem. And we want to feel good about ourselves by being nice people. That's not the Buddhist idea of compassion, of course.
If you could change one thing in the way that Dharma is received or is taught or is practiced here in Britain, what would that be?
Well, I think what I'd like is that put it that way, what I'd like is that in all the different Dharma centres and in all the different traditions that are here in Britain, and that's great, by the way, that all the different Buddhist traditions are here, that there was a kind of clear line going from the profound masters, the heads of the tradition, so to speak, their teaching, going through the centres and going through the groups and the teachings, right down to the ordinary man and woman coming off the street. So there's this clear, unimpeded flow of this beautiful, liberating teaching, so that the ordinary man and woman coming off the street would be able to meet the power of the Dharma without adulteration. What they'll make of it will be for them to decide, just as what Western Buddhism, British Buddhism will be the result of all of our collective decisions, if we can encounter the real pure thing. So it's like, give it to us straight. That's what we want, the Dharma straight. And this is the only thing really I'm talking about in the Buddhism, in this book, which is, look, there's this wonderful, fantastic teaching, which at the same time you can practice as just an ordinary English woman or ordinary English man or ordinary American. You can practice it. Why settle for anything else? There's this, don't you want the real thing? That's what my book is about. The Dharma's been damaged, and let me explain what I'm thinking about this. That in my book, of course, as you mentioned, I pointing out some things that could go wrong, some things possibly are going wrong, and some things that could go wrong in the Western reception of Dharma. And I think the background to that is very much that Tibetan civilization, which is one of the great Buddhist civilizations, like Japanese and Thai and all the rest, Tibetan civilization, which was the shell in which Buddhism was nestling, has been thrown off its base. And so we're receiving Dharma from, yes, a culture in which there are still some great living masters, but a culture which is now a refugee culture. It's done fantastically well, that disaster notwithstanding, but there's a kind of, I'd say, an imbalance of power. I think what I'm saying is that we would be much more clear that we are still the apprentices if it wasn't for the fact that, in a way, Tibetan Buddhism, the institutions of Tibetan Buddhism, has been forced into this rather needy position of having to re-establish itself both in India and the West. And so it already puts the power relationship, to use that word, is not quite right. And therefore that results, I think, can result in things like an adulteration of the Dharma, just in order to have the body of students, the body of support necessary for the continuation of Tibetan Buddhist Dharma. It's almost like it gives too much power to the audience, to the receivers, who can then start to dictate. I've seen this happen, that the Dharma has to present a way which is acceptable in the West. But acceptable in the West, just as acceptable to me, doesn't necessarily mean it's the pure Dharma. Because what's acceptable to my ego is what is congenial to my ego. Project that en masse to the Western audience, and you can see that there's the danger I'm pointing to in my book about the watering down, the weakening of the Dharma in order to be acceptable with this new audience. We must preserve the distinctiveness of the Dharma for it to work as the medicine that it is for human ills. But on the other hand, we have to meet people. I mean that in the most profound sense. We have to meet people where they're at, where they're coming from. People don't know the language of Dharma. Often initially people don't know why Dharma is so profound. They may feel something in response to it. They may feel all they want from it is, well, indeed, just to kind of to regain some balance in their lives. Of course, the Dharma goes far deeper than that. But that's not an illegitimate request from those people. That's not an illegitimate wish. And we should meet it. Going back, Buddha and his teaching have always had that kind of flexibility to meet people where they're at. When people came to see Buddha during his lifetime, oftentimes the question would be, well, how do I become wealthy? And the answer to that, of course, is practice charity, practice giving. How do I get a good rebirth? And so on. These are, in the light of nirvana, in the light of Buddhahood, the kind of profound cosmic goals of Buddhism, these are small goals, but they're meaningful to the people. So analogously, in our culture that people are looking for things like mindfulness, we can't utterly disdain that, because we should be talking to those people. If they want to talk to us, we should be available to talk to them.
It took the Western philosophers, with all their profound knowledge of Western philosophy, an age to begin to take Eastern philosophy seriously.
And relatively few do, even now, which is utterly tragic. And this goes back to my point, I want Buddhism to have a place at the top table. Now, academically speaking, I was trained as a historian of religion, so I'm not trained in Western philosophy, obviously, because through some theological background I know a little bit about it. And therefore I know enough to say Buddhism should, listen, Buddhism has something to say. You'll be very interested in what it has to say. And Buddhism, even just, leave alone the religious commitment, Buddhism's intellectual history is as worthy of your attention as the history of Western philosophy. But if we as Buddhists, as Western Buddhists, are not ourselves aware of that depth of Buddhism and treat it in this rather kind of watered down psychotherapy, then nobody will listen to us. So I want Buddhism at the top table, speaking with those who, appreciate the greatness in the Western intellectual tradition. I want them to know Buddhism has something to say. And, the fact that theism is on the decline, the materialism is a dead end, Buddhism is the intellectual voice and the spiritual voice that should be being listened to in the West today. But we'll do that best if we Westerners, who can say a little thing, realize that we are still the apprentices of this extraordinarily rich and vast tradition behind us. We'll represent it best as mere apprentices of it. And that's why I'm resistant to innovations in the Dharma. In terms of its appearance, it will change naturally. But at the moment, our accent should all be on, let's be the best apprentices we can to the masters who embody this extraordinary richness of 2,500 years of Dharma.